Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I see a lot of participants have joined us already. My name is Rula Kort. I am honored to host this event, co-host with my friend Rami Khashrour, a Palestinian and Ramallah native, for the Q&A of this film. Mayor, chosen as critics' pick by both the New York Times and the IndieWire. Ramallah, Anera has been in Ramallah for 53 years. We have worked on many projects, including water networks, agriculture, roads for farmers, women empowerment programs, professional training programs, building kindergartens, and supporting cultural and educational activities. So this film is close to us and dear to us, like many of you. I'm very excited to have Rami Khashrour. Rami is, as I said, a Palestinian fashion designer. In 2003, he launched his women's wear brand in the US, where he dressed global icons like Kim Kardashian, Heidi Klum, and Her Majesty Queen Rania. He was the finalist on the Bravo hit TV show, Project Runway. We all watched it, Rami, and we all vouched for you, and it was something happening for the Palestinian community in the US. In 2020, Rami launched his latest art project, a social impact accessory and soon-to-be clothing collection inspired by his Palestinian heritage, fusing his designs with hand embroidery made by women in Palestine. His work has been picked by the Ontario Museum in Canada and the British Museum in London. Welcome, Rami. Thank you so much for joining us. And I will allow you to introduce our filmmaker, David.
Thank you, Rula, and thank you, Anera, for having me. It's an honor to be here. And thank you, everybody who's attending. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce everyone to Emmy Award-winning documentary film director, editor, and composer, David Osit, the maker of Mayor. David graduated from the Center of Middle Eastern and North African Studies at the University of Michigan and studied refugee law at the American University of Cairo. He received his MFA in social documentary film from the School of Visual Arts. David is one of the directors of the feature documentary, Thank You for Playing, which premiered at the 2015 Tribeca Film Festival and was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards, winning for Outstanding Arts and Culture Documentary. He also edited and produced Off Rain, which premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and Berlinale in 2016. David is an alumnus of Berlinale Talents and the Sundance Nonfiction Directors Lab. We are so glad to have you join, David, and to answer some questions about the film and the making of this exciting project.
Thank you so much for having me, Rami and Rula and everyone at Anera.
Before we delve into the Q&A, we'd like to play the trailer for the film just to refresh your memories. And just a note on the event procedure tonight, we will have all participants muted and we will take questions on the chat. So if you have questions, please post on the chat. We will start with the questions that you sent out when you registered.
ايش بدك مني؟ اصحى اطلع.
قطاع الحكم المحلي من أجمل القطاعات اللي الواحد ممكن يعمل فيها في الوطن.
خلي بس أعملهم غرفتين بصراحة. خلينا
إذا ما بقول لي عامل الحمام فيهم.
بدي
أنا لغاية الآن مش فاهم شو الست براند.
مينيسوتا The state of 2000
يعني أنت حطيت سلوجن.
لا واحدة منهم.
والله هاي شغل مسي. ما زبطت.
وصلنا ل5 في العد، بينزلوا عملية الإنزال بتصير عن الأسطح.
أنا رئيس بلدية فيك يا عالم، أقسم برب العالم واللي مش عاجبه طف.
هيدي بابليك راحة؟
إنه اليوم في خطاب وراح يتطرق لهذا الموضوع.
راح يعلن إيش؟
طلع شو تجي؟
اطلع هاي وراك. بدنا نشوف شو بصير، الليلة بدها تقوم الدنيا شو.
I'm not quite sure that everyone can imagine what difficulties you face as a mayor in Palestine. We don't have our own currency. We cannot visit Jerusalem. We are surrounded on all sides by Israeli settlements.
كل مرة عم بزور فيها مدينة من المدن الصديقة عم بشعر قديش احنا بإمكاننا نعمل أشياء احنا مش قادرين نعملها.
Very long day. يعني احنا مفترضين انه العالم كله مش عم بينام قلقان علينا. يا زلمه احنا ما حدش.
هذا البربيج ما بينفع.
هي كل سنه نفس الفوضى ونفس القصه.
زي الخباديجي مع
تطلعش انت تطلعش. هذه الارض إلنا بكل محاولاتكم. Maybe I have to say it in other words. It's about dignity.
Beautiful movie, beautiful film.
Thank you, David. As somebody who has grown up in Ramallah and have frequented many of those streets, and this was my stomping ground as a child, it definitely was a nostalgic experience. And I got to reconnect with the emotional intensity of life, day-to-day life in Ramallah. And I think that you capture that quite well. So first of all, congratulations on a very well-made film. And having learned that you were the only person who was working during the production of this film, I think that that is, I'm sure, has intensified the amount of work for you. But I have a question from Colleen Carroll. And it's a straightforward question asking what inspired this film? How did this come about?
Absolutely. Well, I guess the most simple answer would be that I was working off and on in the Middle East for about a decade and studying in Cairo, and was pursuing a career in refugee law before I got invested in working in film. And eventually I got into filmmaking after having visited Ramallah maybe twice, and just as a tourist or as an activist or with friends. And I got a job editing this film that you mentioned, Rami, this film Off Frame, which is by a Palestinian director named Mahanad Yaqoubi. And that edit was in Ramallah. And it had been about, I would say, 4 or 5 years since I'd been to Ramallah at that point. And I was really struck by how much the city had changed, at least to my eyes. And it seemed like all of a sudden there were hipster bars and cafes, and the city had free unlimited public Wi-Fi, and there was a Jaguar dealership, and all these things, at least I didn't notice before. But there was this strange thought going through my head as I was seeing these things, which was that how surprised I was that I was surprised, in that here I was, this Western person who had a degree in Middle Eastern studies, spent time in the region, knew a bit of the language at this point, and still couldn't really shake that monolithic idea of what a Palestinian city is supposed to look like, or what a Middle Eastern city, to be more general, is supposed to look like. And how Ramallah defied all those expectations in this amazing way kind of frustrated me that I was surprised by Ramallah. So I kept thinking about that very complicated feeling. And then I came back to New York, where I live, and we finished the film. And around a year later, the director came to New York, and we were talking one night. And I remember asking him, just out of curiosity, what's the mayor of Ramallah like? And he said something like, he's a really charismatic guy. You'll always see him walking around town with his vape pen, his like e-cigarette, and he's people like him. He's Christian. The mayor of Ramallah by law has to be Christian. It's an old Ottoman law, and all these things were setting off this light bulb above my head of just being fascinated by this unexpected mayor of this unexpected city, while being on this simultaneous quest. It felt like for a decade to convey the experience of the occupation to people who have never been and will never go to Palestine. And it felt like a really unexpected entry point, the idea of civic service and municipal government, to the notion of what life in occupied Ramallah and what life in occupied Palestine could look like. Not an entire portrait, not the entirety of all the complexity that goes into even the city of Ramallah. Ramallah, of course, is far more complicated than even the film can depict, and that there are refugee camps within the city limits. There are checkpoints in the vicinity. There are people on all sides of the political spectrum in Ramallah, and it's such a complicated city in that way. But I felt if I could show Ramallah through the eyes of Musa Hadid, that could be a really interesting film that certainly felt something different than I'd ever seen before. And that was what was exciting to me.
Yeah. Great.
That's great. A question, what was the timeline for the film? When did you think of the idea and when did the filming commence and conclude?
I started filming in late 2017, about 5 days before ex-President Donald Trump announced the U.S. Embassy move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So that was on my first shoot when I'm sitting in the office with Musa and his priest, and we're finding that out all together. So that was early on, and I filmed off and on for about 1.5 years. I would do 6 to 8 week shoots and spend time in the city, but then also come back to the States. And because I was fundraising for the film and editing sample material for the film and trying to keep myself fresh and not too exhausted. So I would go back and forth for about 1.5 years.
Question from me, just to follow up. Were you ever worried about your life? With all what happened with Trump announcing Jerusalem as a capital for Israel and people angry and, those burning tires and demonstrations, were you worried about yourself, about your own safety?
The experience of making a film, especially when you're the one behind the camera and you're all alone, it's a really strangely empathetic experience in that I'm constantly trying to think about what the people I'm filming are feeling and thinking, to the point where I kind of lose a little bit of what my own feelings are at times. Because if you're making a film like this film was, for me, certainly a film very much about emotions and human beings trying to express themselves or to achieve goals of theirs, you're thinking all the time about what they're going through. So in some of those moments of stress and violence from the occupation, I was really mostly just thinking, well, how are the people I'm filming doing? And what made me perhaps even more sad, and what I found more horrifying than anything else, was the normalcy that I would experience. And I'm sure that any other person who's spent time in the West Bank or in Gaza has ultimately experienced, is the normalcy with which the occupation can assert itself. It becomes so normalized that the fear that I would bring in as a Westerner was not applicable in the landscape of people who have to live this horror day in and day out. And I'll tell a really small story that I think really brings this home, in that I'm hoping most of you on this Zoom have seen the film, but there's a scene of a sort of penultimate scene of violence towards the end of the film, where City Hall is under attack by IDF soldiers. And that I remember filming that scene, and the night finally ended at 1 or 2 a.m. And I remember going home and to my apartment in Ramallah thinking, wow, the next day, I've got to be up early. I've got to go to Musa's office early. Everyone's going to be talking about this. Soldiers in downtown Ramallah at 7 o'clock dinner time, like, that doesn't happen that frequently. They'll come all the time to the outskirts of the city, but like in Ramallah Tahta, like in this neighborhood at 7 o'clock, that's unusual. And this was crazy. And everyone's going to be talking about it. So I wake up early, I go film the rocks being swept in the morning. And I go to Musa's office and I'm waiting for him to show up, and he walks in the door and he looks at me and he says, "We've got to go." And I say, "What?" He's like, the school has new doors. You've been filming this for 2 years. You've been following the story of the doors and the school for 2 years. And And they're here. So we went in, and I remember just thinking, wow, like here's yet another way in which I'm bringing my Western baggage into this story. But again, I wanted to communicate that feeling of surprise that I felt to an audience. And that's what a lot of this movie is. And a lot of the films I make in general are really about what interests me. I'm trying to ask questions with my movies that I don't know the answers to. I would find it so boring to watch a film where the filmmaker doesn't go on a journey making the film. And for me, the question that kept haunting this movie is, how do you run a city when you don't have a country? How do you run a city under the shadow of an occupation, as Palestine is living under the shadow of? And so I tried to live that question with the people I was filming, and with Musa Hadi. And in that moment, I realized, yeah, that this experience of me realizing, that I called it the horrifying banality of the occupation. I needed to convey that to an audience.
Yeah. You did an amazing job doing this.
Yeah.
Rami.
Speaking of the soldiers, was that something that before you started working on the film that you were planning to cover, or was that just something that was coincidental that just so happened to be towards the end?
I set out to make a film about the local government and how it operates, knowing without a shadow of a doubt that at a certain point, if I was following this story for a year, for 2 years, that the occupation would assert itself into the frame. That was something I knew. I didn't know how, I didn't know in what way, but I knew that if I was making a film about the municipality of Ramallah trying to operate itself, that at a certain point, at some point along the way, the occupation would show up, because that is the nature of life in an occupied city, in an occupied country. And I knew that's where the power of the film would be. And I kept thinking about that before I even conceptualized before I even shot the film. And as I was just conceptualizing it, and as I was pitching it to funders, I would tell people, I'm trying to make Parks and Recreation, but in Ramallah. I'm trying to make Veep, but in Ramallah, and not in any way to make fun or make light of anything, but to use comedy and to use absurdity as actually a tool to emphasize the tragedy. Because the amazing thing about satire or political comedy is when those rules break all of a sudden, and you're left with the horrific circumstances, and you're no longer in this light mood, and the lightness breaks into darkness. It's very jarring as an audience, and that's less about being an activist and more about being a filmmaker. And I think I would say I'm probably more of an activist than my movie is personally, but I think that sometimes it's a really amazing way to I'm telling you a story in this movie, and the movie's telling you a story, and so to tell a story, it has to work within these rules of what good storytelling is, which is I'm holding your hand a little bit more softly than perhaps an activist would, and I'm trying to guide you into the story very gently, and then I break the rules halfway through the film a couple of times, and that's a really important thing for me when I'm thinking about how can I grab a new audience with this film, which was very much the goal.
May I follow up with one more from Linda, because it's related to what you were saying. She's asking, how did you decide on editing the format and the fact that it didn't have any narration? Like, because we all know that editing does in the end sort of like give you different impressions. And I think that considering that, what had happened, and I personally, I'm glad that you had showcased what happened towards the end with the soldiers, because even though it may not happen in Ramallah Tahta or in specific cases, it's definitely happening in one neighborhood or another within the West Bank or Gaza. Gaza is a whole other reality that you don't even experience in the West Bank because of the geographical location, and that they're blocked by land, water, and air. But still, it doesn't make it any less difficult. How did you decide when you went into the editing room, okay, where do I begin? And I understand that the water fountain was a part of the focal point, but we'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, of course. Well, I could answer this question for 40 more minutes, but because it took a very long time and a lot of thought to edit the film. But the editing room started here, right? In that the edit was beginning as I'm filming things, and that was one of the gifts of being my own editor, and I worked with other people occasionally. I worked with another editor for 3 months at the beginning of the project, and then I worked with another consulting editor for the last 2 weeks of editing before we locked. Just mostly in part because I wanted to work with someone who had no idea about anything related to Palestine. A filmmaker who didn't know the difference between the West Bank and Gaza, like someone who could look at the footage that I'd been filming from a storytelling standpoint and communicate these ideas about occupation, all these things that we've been talking about, to an audience that wouldn't necessarily know those things. And to do that, I needed to work with someone who didn't know those things because I know those things. And I think like the benefit of having a degree or a lived experience is ideally that gives you the power to communicate something simply to someone. And we forget sometimes, we think like we have a master's degree, which means we have to talk about something as though we have a master's degree. But sometimes the greatest show of intelligence about something is to be able to explain it to a 6-year-old. And I think Americans, a lot of them are like 6-year-olds when it comes to understanding the Middle East, because we're not trained with any nuance. We grow up seeing these reductive images of Palestine, of the Middle East. I'll speak from my own personal experience. You know, I grew up in a pretty conservative working class town called Yonkers in New York. I was a freshman during 9/11. The images coming to me at that point in my life, before I had any interest in the Middle East, the images coming to me of Palestine were twinned with images of 9/11. So the Second Intifada and, you know, Palestinians, you know, trying to advocate for themselves in the streets, these images were basically beamed to me in the same vein of imagery of terrorism aligned against the United States. That's the depth of knowledge that most people my generation, frankly, have learned what the Middle East was. So I'm thinking to myself as I'm beginning the edit and as I was making this film, you know, Palestine is depicted constantly in this one-dimensional way, where the Palestinians are at worst depicted as like religious fanatics and terrorists, which I don't agree with, obviously, or at best, they're depicted as one-dimensional victims who are kind of agents of Israeli guilt about the occupation, or Israeli complex feelings about the occupation. And I wanted to reject that too. I wanted to I wanted to make a space to add imagery to the idea of what Palestine could look like and what Palestinian lives and people could look like. So that was really front and center for me. So what that meant was a lot of editing decisions. Like I'm certainly not going to narrate the film. It's not my voice. I did a lot of interviews for the film. I filmed about 350 hours of footage for the film, which is a lot. And a lot of that was basically just for me to learn and to research and to think about what could work. And there's characters I cut out of the film, storylines I cut out of the film. And I always kept coming back to the central story, which was the simplest story. I kept thinking about what would it be like to make a fable, almost like a parable. The mayor and his fountain, you know, the mayor and the celebrations. And the simpler the story became, I kept finding in the edit room, the more complicated the emotions you feel became, because there's so much going on, but the stakes are small. And I think that comes something that's more from fiction filmmaking, I think, than documentary. And I watched a lot of fiction films trying to prepare for this movie and the edit, and thinking about the best stories that I'm always told and the things that give me the biggest emotional response.
Would you like to?
Max said one of the most intriguing aspects of the documentary is how normal all of the issues that occur in Ramallah are. I work in a municipal government and can relate to the issues on the personal level. The shadow of the occupation, however, is always there. What was the most difficult thing about balancing these stories? That everything from zoning to sewage management has to navigate this barrier.
Yeah, I like I was saying, I mean, it was fundamental to the film that the world of the story of the movie be about the municipality and through the eyes of the mayor of Ramallah. You know, to speak a little bit about Musa, because we haven't spoken about him too much. One thing I really liked about Musa as a character in the film, you know, is he would always say something like, you know, I'm not the mayor, I just hold the office for now. And there was this consummate energy of a public servant to him, and that he was constantly working, constantly out in the streets, trying to do the things that he was doing. And I really felt like the nature of the film was trying to just show you what his work was like, show you what his world was like, and all the interruptions to it. And it's funny, I mean, this is more like cinema related stuff, but you know, when I first started filming with him, he almost struck me as like a Hollywood leading man, like from the old Hollywood, not new Hollywood, but like classic, like a Gary Cooper, or a like you know, like a John Wayne, like a sort of silent stoic hero, and lots of, you know, facial expressions communicating a lot of his feelings and versus words. And I wanted to playfully use that in the film as like you're following along, and that's partly what the music is doing kind of early on in the film, with the Star Wars scroll and the classical score underneath this city that never gets treated with music like that, you know, in a movie. And I really wanted to just lean into, you have an understanding that here's a man with dignity. And what the next 80 minutes of the film are going to be is showing you all the ways in which the occupation tries to strip dignity from this man and from this city. So it was really important for me to let you as an audience have an evolution in your understanding of, like, you know, maybe in the first 15 minutes when you're seeing parkouring Santa Clauses, you know, in a Christmas festival, maybe you're seeing that in the first 15 minutes, and you might be thinking to yourself what I was thinking to myself when I saw that, which is, this seems like a very strange way for a mayor to spend their time. But by the end of the film, I think you start to realize that these are in fact acts of resistance. They're small acts of resistance, but they're acts of resistance because the idea of existence is a political act in Palestine. So to be able to say that you exist is to be able to do something like this. And to me, that seemed like a really intoxicating idea to convey to a Western audience, because I don't think Americans are used to or conditioned to think about acts of resistance very much.
Right. Well, they're not under occupation, thankfully. But
Yeah.
one thing I think is important to mention for me personally is that, you know, showcasing Christmas in Ramallah, Palestine, is important because I think, especially an American audience whose tax dollars is involved to determine the fate of Palestinians, is the diversity of Palestinians. We are Muslims, we are Christians, we are, you know, when you know, I myself personally grew up in a Christian family, but you know, I think in politics, Christianity is played and manipulated to pass certain agendas that might actually not be for the benefit of Palestinians, including Christians. But I think it's good, especially for non-Arab audience, to see that, because as neighboring Arab countries, we all are aware that there are Christian Arabs and Muslims, and we're diverse. So I think that it's good that point was there. One question from somebody is asking, what would you say is the most strategic, from Lori, she's asking, what would you say is the most strategic way to use the film to raise awareness in the States on the occupation?
That's a wonderful question. I've been really grateful that organizations such as Anera and other groups have been excited about the film, to share the film with people. You know, the film's been available. The film festival circuit started about a week before America went on lockdown last year, and it's been almost a year now since the film premiered. But despite that, we've been really fortunate with how many people have been able to see the film in the States. And we need to keep doing more things like this. There's nothing I'd love more than to bring the film onto Capitol Hill and get it in front of Congress people, to get maybe Rashida to help us with that or something. But I think one thing that's been really exciting to me is that people have been able to engage with this film as a surprise to them. I've heard so many times from so many people, I did not expect a film about Palestine to be like this. And I think as a result, it's been able to reach people who I think are normally not reached by media that is trying to do what I think all of us in this room are often trying to do in our daily conversations or in the work that we do, which is try to raise awareness for the occupation, for the issues of the occupation, and for the rights of Palestinians to exist as as human beings. And I think that I think this film basically, I mean, to be completely honest with you, I think that what the film can do is just be seen. I think that when you watch the film, I think that you have an emotional reaction to this story. And I think I personally didn't make the film, as I was saying before, to be a piece of activist cinema necessarily. I made the film to move you and to surprise you and to give you new emotions that, if you're not from the region, perhaps that you haven't had. I didn't make the film for Palestinians as much, because it's not my business really to make a film for I'm not trying to teach Palestinians about their own home, but I also feel like Palestinian folks who I've talked to have really appreciated the film, which has been amazing. But my real goal is to get the film seen, and to get the film seen by people who would never think about any solidarity or commonality between themselves and the plight of Palestinians.
We're going to start taking questions directly from participants. If they want to say their own, ask their own question, I will ask one question that Edward had asked. But if anyone from the audience would like to ask questions, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you, as we go, and let you know that you're, to ask your question. Okay, Edward asks, is the mayor still in office? How is he doing now?
The mayor's still in office. He's doing well. The situation in Palestine is very difficult with COVID right now, with salaries not being paid, not full salaries for municipal employees not being able to be fully paid due to some really complicated bureaucratic holdups between the Israeli government and the PA. But the mayor's okay, his family's okay. I talk to them all the time. I was just texting with him this morning, actually.
Really?
Yeah, of course. A big article in Haaretz just came out about the film today, which was very nice. So we were talking about that a little bit, and but he's fine, and he will be in office until the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. I have a question from Jala, and he asks, in your opinion, how does the film highlight interconnectedness of the Palestinian struggle and resistance with other global social justice movements? Sometimes the best advocacy is with other struggles, and perhaps in this day and age, this is becoming more and more impactful.
I think it's a great question. I think though that the film itself isn't making that bridge. I think that bridge is only helping. Hopefully, ideally, that bridge is only facilitated by the film. I think that, for example, when we really first started doing screenings of the film in the U.S., it was late summer, and the U.S. found itself in the midst this incredible moment, and all of a sudden, never would I have imagined that Americans would be watching the film thinking about what their experience was at the protests, 20 minutes away here in New York, running from tear gas, and finding solidarity and common ground with the idea of protests for advocating for the rights of your fellow man in Palestine. Now that moment has existed for many years, even back to the Ferguson Palestine moment, which was really special. Which was 8 years ago now, almost. But it's existed prior to that. But I think that bridge forms based on where you are in your space as you're watching this movie or watching any film. And what I'm grateful for is, I personally, maybe this is a controversial opinion, but I think it really is amazing if you can watch this film and see your own experiences in it. And I think that I didn't make the film, I didn't seek out to make a film that was about, you know, cultural relativism and saying, oh, these people are just like us, because of course they're not, you know, they are living, as you said, Rami, like Palestinians are living under occupation. That is not something that Americans have ever had to experience in any capacity, unless you're Puerto Rican or Hawaiian. But I think the basic nature of, can I have something in common with people that I've been told through media my entire life I have nothing in common with? That's a bridge. That's a first bridge. And we need lots of bridges, but this is one piece, hopefully.
Yeah. Rula, would you like to?
Yeah, Linda has asked, how did you convince Musa to do the movie? Let's go back to Musa. He's such an amazing character, and was he happy when it was done? Was he?
Yeah, he really loved it, which I was this will sound weird, but like it would have been impossible for me for him to not like. I made the film what felt like in collaboration with him. You know, I would talk. I'm not the kind of filmmaker that I'm going to show up to a place and just say, you know, like you'll like it, you know, you'll see it when it's done. You know, like I talked to him about what I was interested in. I asked him what was he interested in showing me about Ramallah, and I would have a communication with him and his family, and we all became very close, and we had the same goal. Interestingly, my goal with making the film was to show Ramallah to an audience that doesn't get to see it. His goal, in part, in addition to running the city, is also to show Ramallah to the international community in a certain way, and to become an ambassador in a certain way, which I don't think was a goal that he first set out for and wanted to have, but I think it's become a necessary goal for running the city of Ramallah the way that he does. And so, no, I mean, he really did like the film, which was very important to me. It's, you know, our premiere at our first film festival, he was getting ready to come. He was heading to the airport, but because of COVID, he had to turn back. And it's still to this day one of the saddest things for me, because we were screening the film in Columbia, Missouri. There were 1,700 people in the audience, 1,500 of which were Midwesterners, you know, and it was a standing ovation for, like, during the fountain, at the end of the film, as the credits come on, people just standing and cheering, and I really wish you could have seen that. That would have been really cool. But here's to more in the future.
Inshallah. So did anything happen to the fountain from the stone throwing?
Fountain's better now. It still has no name.
Okay, great. Still has no name. Okay, so maybe we should.
It's the Nafura Montaza.
Yeah. But we grew up, Rami and I grew up going to the Muntaza Ramallah.
That's right. Yes, when it was a real Muntaza. Yeah.
Yeah.
The vintage version of it. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a family gathering center where there was always Kulthum music and hookahs, and, you know, it was, the water fountain was much smaller. I think it was there, but yeah, it definitely is. I would say possibly part of, like, it's part of the DNA of Ramallah. But does it metaphorically represent something else to you, the fountain? What does it mean? What, after having gone through the production journey of making the film, upon completion of it, does it resemble something to you? Because I noticed it started there and then it ended there, and it was a sweet and happy ending somewhat.
Of course. Well, yeah, it's funny. You know, I think the ending I find the ending somewhat bittersweet and hard to explain. But I do think that it's amazing how many people have told me their interpretations of what the fountain means. When I was in Columbia, Missouri, a very religious man came up to me, and he held me by the shoulder and he said, the fountain is a baptism for Ramallah. And I said, that wasn't intentional. I don't personally see it that way, but it was such a beautiful idea to me. But I think, yeah, like I was saying before, I do feel like the fountain by the end of the film becomes a symbol of resistance in some way. And I think that, well, I mean, I just know that when I filmed the fountain, I kind of felt like it had to be the ending of the film. And it wouldn't have felt that way unless I saw all the work that Musa was putting into it, and how this almost felt to me like a metaphor for the limits of his power as a mayor, the limits of his control. Every mayor around the world, this is another thing in terms of the relativism, every mayor around the world is basically the same. If something is going well in a city, we're all like, okay. And if everything's going wrong, it's like, that's the mayor's fault for sure. And like, I know that's how it is for me here in New York City. I'm sure it's like that for many of you elsewhere. And for me, this idea of the film imbuing Musa in this sort of stereotypical Hollywood way as being this person of power, and then the kind of showing the limits of that power as the film continues, but showing that the fountain is really one thing that he can have control over. And what is the fountain? It's not just a simple little thing. It's a thing of beauty. It's an act of beauty. And whether you're a personal fan of the fountain or not, what that means to Musa is very much, well, this is at least a way that I can provide something to my city.
Yes. I think we may have skipped a few questions from prior, but there is one last, I think the question from Tammy regarding the humor, the branding meeting, the non-working TV, the Christmas tree. Do you look for humor or do you stumble onto it?
Well, it's certainly both, but I would always keep an eye out for things that I found to be humorous while I was filming. And again, not because I was interested in just making people laugh cheaply, but because all of that humor I felt emphasized the thing I was just talking about, the limits of power. Like, for example, when Musa finds out about the embassy move, and then he's trying to get his radio and the newspaper, you're laughing a little bit during this, and it's funny, but to me, there's a deeper feeling behind that. It's not just funny, haha, like a kid's comedy show. It's again about the limits of power and the humor of, like, how do I live stream the IDF soldiers laying siege to my City Hall, this idea of not being able to communicate to the outside world in this way, of what's happening here in Ramallah. It's not, look how backward it is. Look, it's showing in a microcosm, in a way that makes you laugh and also stings you, because it makes you feel sad at the same time. Now all the stones are in the fountain, he says. That's not just a funny moment. That's also like, oh wow, that's what people are forced to care about in a situation like this, because where's the rest of the autonomy that would come from being able to defend yourself, or to be able to stand up for your own individuality and autonomy? So for me, the humor was definitely something I would look at, but I didn't have to look hard, because local government is absurd anywhere in the world. It's just always funny. It's always funny to watch how cities run, because it's people working intensely hard over small things. That's why local government is funny. And so I knew that would be the one thing in common between New York and Ramallah, or anywhere else.
If I may suggest something to our audience, if your question has not been answered, would you mind please retyping it? It'll make it faster for us to get to. Rula, would you like to?
Yeah. Lori has asked, what would you say the most strategic way to use the film to raise awareness in the US on occupation? On a different note, your inclusion of Musa's response to Mike Pence's comment on Christians in Palestine, i.e. trying to draw emphasis on the false dichotomy between Christians and Muslim, was great.
I think we answered the first part of that question already, but yeah, I mean, again, I think it's just really important to, in terms of using the film, I think I have a disconnect between me as the filmmaker and me as the I'm not I'm very good at making the movies, but I'm not good at the part where it's like, how do I use this as an educational tool? I'm leaning on people who are excited to share this film with their friends, with their enemies, with people they don't agree with people they do agree with, because I feel like that's the power of the experience of the film to me, is just sitting down and watching it.
I have one here. I don't have a name, but the question is, how will this how will this film live on for past mayors in their terms? I'm not sure. It's not very clear, but I'm going through every question so everybody can be included.
How will the film, sorry, what was it?
How will this film, okay, I'm not sure I understand clearly what it is, so I'll skip to another one. How did you see the role of NGOs during the filming?
There was rather limited interaction between nonprofit organizations and NGOs with the municipality that I would be filming personally. There would be occasional interactions, and I was filming a little bit with some NGOs and nonprofits that work in Ramallah. I filmed with Rula Kort, which is Architectural Heritage Foundation, and I filmed with a couple other groups. And that footage was all really interesting, and it also provided some really big macro ideas about Palestine and about Ramallah. The role of the municipality was, though, operating in a much more specific way than some of these larger nonprofit organizations and NGOs, and in particular, the role of the municipalities is not working with, for example, the refugee population in Ramallah or on the outskirts of Ramallah in Jalazon or in Amari refugee camps. So there was and I also did filming there too, and there was a time when part of the film was the contrast between Jalazon and Ramallah, in that Jalazon doesn't have these municipal services that Ramallah has, for example, and I found that to be very interesting too. But again, it was really just paring down the focus to what Musa's mission was, particularly.
David, I wanted to jump in here for a second. This is Sean with Anera. When I saw the fire and they were trying to put it out with the hose, there is a really nice project that Anera has done with the city of Ramallah, which is a wastewater reuse project. And I don't know if you saw any of it while you were there. We've done two things with the reclaimed wastewater. We've put piping in the medians and in city parks, any green spaces to get flowers and plants blooming again. And the mayor's been a big supporter. And we also provide water for the firefighters. And they had to make choices before that. If there was a fire in the brush in the outskirts of the town, they would have to let it burn because they were worried if they used the precious water that they were buying to put out that fire, and some apartment went up in flames, they wouldn't have enough water to put out the apartment. And the city of Ramallah actually put $100,000 worth of in-kind support into that $1 million project. So fantastic project, and a nice symbol of a mayor and a city trying to beautify, to do the sort of normal things that a city does. And I wanted to tell you one fun story, and fantastic film, and thank you for making the film, and thank you for being with us tonight. Right after I watched it the other day, I was out walking with a friend who doesn't work with Anera, but travels sometimes to Palestine and has stayed in Ramallah a few times. And he told me that he was there at Christmas time when the announcement was made that the U.S. was moving the embassy. And his wife called him, having seen disturbances on TV, and said, "You've got to leave. You can't stay there. You must come home right now." And he said, "Well, yesterday they turned the Christmas tree off, but today it's back on. So I think it's okay to stay."
That sounds about right.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, any more questions?
I have one more here from the earlier ones. What did you discover about Ramallah or the West Bank that surprised you?
I mean, everything began as a surprise to me. As I was saying before, I was surprised how warmly I was welcomed. I don't think that anyone was under an obligation to be kind to the American guy named David, who's running around with a camera all the time for 2 years. I was really blown away by people's hospitality towards me just constantly filming, and I was amazed how quickly I also felt to have a family in Ramallah with filming. My partner came to visit me at one point during the shoot shooting, and she came for like a week. And we, for anyone who hasn't been to Ramallah, you can walk across Ramallah in an hour. It's not physically a large, or rather not a wide city. And she'd never been, and I was giving her a tour, and over the course of our tour, I think 5 or 6 people like stopped in their cars, honked to me, waved hi, council members, people who worked at the municipality. And at the end of the walk, my partner turned to me and was like, are you famous here? Like, are you actually like a famous person in Ramallah? But it's a small town. And I think that was what I think surprised me most, is that it's kind of, it's both a village acting like a city and a city that acts a little bit like a village. And that might sound really confusing, but I think anyone from Ramallah knows what I'm talking about on that one.
I think we have new questions.
Yeah, I just asked Nader if he wants to ask his question himself, or not Nader. Yeah, he said, great, captivating movie. However, I was taken aback by the, sorry, I should wear my glasses. You go ahead, Rami, why don't you read it?
Great and captivating movie. However, I was taken aback by the use of expletives throughout the movie, which was not fitting with the culture or faith of the Palestinian community. Did you get the mayor's opinion on this? And if so, was he okay with it?
No, thank you for the question. I mean, I think it was important to me and to the mayor that the film be honest, and people were speaking the way they speak. And Mayor Musa, I told him early on, and I told him towards the end of the process, we'll watch the film. If there's anything that you think could bring harm to anyone, then let me know. But otherwise, you have to understand that part of my job as a filmmaker is that I have to be able to make the film without censorship. And he understood that completely. And I think in the particular case of the way people are speaking, I think it was important to everyone that it feel genuine and not censored, and that it feel honest. And I think that was certainly important to me, and I think also very important to Musa.
We have a question from April. Was the reference to art and choral group exchanges, and even the reference to sports, meant to highlight the futility of substantive exchanges of an example of something small that would actually work?
I would see it something in the middle of those two options. I think for me, that moment was how sad that this is the only thing that anyone can really offer Mayor Musa on his international tour, is a choir or a football group. I think that to me speaks of the futility of what Musa's mission was when he would go out on these international trips, but not to the futility of substantive exchange. I think it's more the difficulty of trying to go out, and I think people from the global south are constantly being asked to plead their case. And this is similar to a scene that we didn't discuss, which is the scene with the German delegation, which is a really important scene to me in the film. I think people from the global south are constantly being asked to explain themselves, to come to the table, to rise up, to rise themselves up, to put away their pride. And I think in these moments, you see the way in which that can be really that can be very, I forget the word, but like deleting to an identity and to a people, and to someone's pride and dignity. And I think a real theme of this film is dignity. And I wanted to stay inside of that. So in that moment when, also again, this is another thing where, you have all these documentaries where there's the moment where the person from the global south travels around the world and like gets help, and like Sting comes and does a concert, and then everyone goes home. And I wanted to do something to show, well, this is what actually happens on these trips. People travel, they get hosted, they're well fed for 4 days. But ultimately it's for the sake of, even when Prince William comes, it's to kick a football and leave. There's there's a lot of work to be done to make these sorts of interactions more fruitful.
I think that part where the mayor did respond to one of the members from the German delegation about dignity, I think there was a lot of weight, and that was an important point for me personally, because it explained a lot in one simple statement about the overall cloud of occupation that every Palestinian has to endure and live under.
Exactly.
So thank you for including that. That was very important.
Of course. No, it was vital to me. I remember, when you're filming, when you're making these movies, there are moments that as you're filming them, you realize that not only are they important moments, but they are actually advancing your own understanding of what your movie is and what your story is. And that moment with the German delegation was really fundamental in that way, especially just hearing, because what I heard was Mayor Musa, who up until that point, I've heard him talk about politics here and there, but in a sort of like, we don't want to get too involved. We have to make sure that the city is focused on running itself and not replacing the PA or anything like that. And up until that point, that's the way in which Musa would engage with politics or political conversations. But then there was that conversation, and he said in a sentence something that I've been trying to articulate for years of talking to friends and colleagues in the West as to why it's important to not put more burdens on Palestinians.
Okay. Good. We're come to the end of the event. It's 7 o'clock. We promised 1 hour. If anyone has last minute questions, they can put it on the chat now or can say it now. We can unmute you. Other than that, it was such a pleasure, and we have a lot of thanks. People are thanking us. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rami, for joining us. It's just what a pleasure to chat with you about Ramallah and about the film. And David, you captured the life of Palestinians in that one movie. It's just like the first thing that I came out with the moves, like this nonchalantness that it's hard for people to understand, that, there's all kinds of things happening, and then you have time to play with little kids and kick football with them and go on with your life, and things happen, and this is the resilience or nonchalantness that Palestinians live under occupation, and you were able to capture it perfectly in your
That's so meaningful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram.
David, for your time, and thank you for sharing with us the entire background details behind making this fantastic film.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Rami, for hosting, and Rula.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.